Well, today I want to continue talking about how culture analyzes and deals with the pandemic of the coronavirus. Last week, or a couple of weeks ago, I posted on YouTube an explanation on how cultures see risk and blame, especially as it relates to the COVID-19. Today, I want to look at fear through the lens of culture and social environment. It's impossible to quantify, but I often say that among most Americans, probably 75% of what we do, act, or think is determined by culture. For communities in other parts of the world, people living in isolated villages in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, or farmers in Laos where there's limited education or travel, at least 95% of their behavior and belief is dictated by culture. That is how dominant culture is among humanity. Social control is manifested through our family structure, our religious beliefs, our peers, and our neighbors. No individual is a totally free moral agent. We all behave and believe to certain things dictated by our culture and controlled within our social environment. Fear. Sociologist Norbert Elias has written, the idea of cultural scripts can help reveal much about emotions such as fear. A cultural script communicates rules about feelings and also ideas about what those feelings mean. So, the impact of fear is determined by the situation people find themselves in, but it is also, to some extent, the product of social construction. End of quote. And over the last 11 or 12 weeks, there has been many voices out there giving the cultural narrative about this pandemic. Sociologist David Altheide has argued, fear does not just happen. It is socially constructed and then manipulated by those who seek to benefit. And those who seek to benefit would be on the left as well as the right. From her book, How Institutions Think, Mary Douglas writes, our social interaction consists very much in telling one another what right thinking is and passing blame on wrong thinking. This indeed is how we build the institutions, squeezing each other's ideas into a common shape so that we can prove the rightness by sheer numbers of independent assent. Having established that culture forms and determines behavior, we now address the issue of fear and applying it to the response worldwide of the COVID-19. In the graph below, I again analyze culture through the lens of the grid and group matrix. And you may want to stop the tape right here and just look over this graphic, though I will be going into detail with each one later on. Remembering that the bureaucratic social environment is a high grid and low group environment. The hierarchical social environment is high grid and high group. The collectivists are low grid and high group, and the individualist is low grid and low group. Now, when we talk about grid and group, grid indicates societies organized by roles and position. And so the more roles and the more position in a church or in a business, the higher that grid is. Bureaucratic and hierarchical environments have more roles than individualist and collectivist. Group indicates self-identity and loyalty to the group, such as the Amish. Hierarchical and collectivists are higher in group interest, less so with bureaucratic or the individualist social environments. So let's look at each one of them as it relates to fear and social control. Bureaucratic environments are analytical and make decisions based on data. Much of the debate about COVID-19, whether to open or stay in place, is driven by the data, though I would argue that the data bureaucrats focus on is a moving target. How many ventilators do we need? Masks, testing, and when will the vaccine be available? Their response to fear is to follow the guidelines, and the bureaucratic faith is in the science and the data, which will eventually solve the problem, though eventually is an open-ended timeline. The hierarchical society, such as in India and many parts of Asia, are structured even more than bureaucrat cultures, as they have the additional layer of family and clan in addition to the political power over them, such as the Chinese government. Because they have a fatalistic worldview, calamity can be viewed as an act of the gods or God or ancestors. Ritual, such as fasting and praying and to the saints and to the ancestors, attending shrines, are all an attempt to coerce the supernatural to remove the plague. In the end, however, because they are fatalistic, all matters are out of their control, and what will be, will be. The collective social environments, they do not have strict authoritative structures to guide them, so they depend on groups they are associated with for guidance. In tribal societies, they belong to a fear culture and hold superstitious beliefs about the unseen spirits which dominate their behavior in time of crisis. Many Christians belong to their denominational group and seek guidance from the association on how to manage the COVID-19, which may include the same rituals as the hierarchist or following the rules of the bureaucrats. Individualism is a cultural mindset, but it also could be a generational ethos. Americans, notably, have an individualistic attitude, and their historical roots dominate their thinking and behavior. Older people, over time, have developed an immunity to the voices of fear based on their own experience. A personal example is I have been hospitalized twice in Africa for malaria and dengue fever. And even though malaria was always in the places where I worked, I did not stop working in the bush of Kenya out of fear that I would again get a mosquito bite. Individualists resist the herd mentality and are a bit skeptical of the ever-shifting guidelines of experts and try to ascertain proper and responsible behavior. Fundamentally, the fear that grips this world in these times of COVID-19 is death. As we have seen, how people and cultures deal with the fear of death is manifested differently. As a follower of Christ, we are to pay more attention to His faithfulness than the fears of sickness or death. As to social control, the words of the Apostle Paul is to be heeded. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Well, I invite your comments, and even if you disagree or you agree, I would appreciate it. And thanks for listening.